Hello, and welcome to the module Monitoring Common Core Instruction in the ELA Classroom. My name is Leslie Zaroya, and I'm a Reading Language Arts Consultant here at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Today we'll look at why a monitoring system is a valuable piece of Common Core instruction. We'll explore components of effective monitoring systems and figure out a few ways to get going with it. So let's start with the why. With the myriad of things everyone has to do in a day, why is a monitoring system something we should devote time to? Well, essentially, what gets monitored gets done. When we draw attention to something in our school, focus on it, talk about it, make it front and center, it tends to get better. Not rocket science, right? Beyond that, it's also about supporting teachers. When we pay attention to how instruction is evolving in classrooms, we get a better sense of the things teachers are both excelling at and struggling with. Resources can then be utilized efficiently. Teachers who are stellar at one aspect can coach or mentor others who maybe don't have as solid a grip. Another key thing here is that it keeps it real by focusing on students, how students are responding to the instruction they are receiving. It grounds the conversation on instruction in facts. Students are either grasping the content or floundering. Usually it's nuances of this kind of simplified statement. Some are getting it, some are not, but it allows us to ask, why are some there and others not? It opens that door to deeper discussion around student learning. Finally, when you monitor instruction closely, it in some ways shows you value the work. You acknowledge how hard it is to provide really real quality instruction. You identify the places where incredible gains are made and celebrate successes. It creates both a professionalism about the work and hopefully propels the work forward, making us enthusiastic about doing better. Now, you may think this is a little crazy, but I've witnessed it. Okay, so let's look at a few components of successful monitoring. We'll explore clear expectations and agreements, some standardized tools for monitoring, the notion of feedback and support, and finally, transparency of process. Let's start with clear expectations and agreements. You may think, duh, but this is probably the number one issue schools forget to put in place when it comes to monitoring. Teachers need to have an explicitly clear understanding of what is expected in the classroom when it comes to Common Core instruction, meaning they can rattle off those items when asked. Recently, when I asked a group of teachers the question, what are the expectations regarding Common Core instruction in your classroom? They really couldn't specifically say outside of teach the standards. So what I'm referring to here is making sure the things you want to see daily in Common Core instruction are front and center with teachers. For example, in my recent work with one particular school, we started with objectives. We asked teachers to post the lesson objectives on the board every single day, so that when we came in to observe, we knew what the tasks students were engaged in were leading to, and of course also so the students would know what was expected of them that day. Well, we discovered that they really didn't know what an objective was. So we did the next step. We started training and coaching around clear lesson objectives. We gave examples of objectives. We wrote objectives together. We evaluated each other's objectives. They realized they had been writing agendas, not objectives. They were focused on the activities of the lesson, not the outcomes. So after about 6 months of continual work and refinement, objectives became a solid part of the instructional program. It was a clear expectation that had been trained, coached, and discussed ad nauseum. But now they do it well and it drives their planning. They focus on what students will be learning, not just doing in the lesson. So this is just one example, but it shows that if teachers are not clear about what is expected, how can we monitor what is happening? So rule number 1 is set the expectations. Pick a few key elements of quality instruction and make sure everyone gets the support they need to implement them, whether it be training or coaching, and then talk about it together in PLC time. Share examples and successes. We all love to share when things go well. It's a great way to build capacity. So this leads sort of naturally into the next component of monitoring, standardized tools, meaning that the tools you use to monitor are familiar to teachers, often even created by them, or at the very least sanctioned. In my court school work, we asked all of the ELA teachers to help us create a tool, an ELA Common Core Classroom Implementation Guide, outlining all the things they thought should be part of an ELA Common Core classroom. We created the tool together, refined it, revised it, and then held them to it. We said this is what we all agreed were essential components in an ELA classroom, so let's make sure we're doing these things. I'll share a version of this in a minute, but the important thing here is that the teachers participated in the process and were able to have input. We also then visited their classrooms, used the guide, checking off elements we witnessed, and were able to debrief with teachers about it. It gave us leverage to say, what are we doing well? What are we missing when we were debriefing? Sometimes we pull teachers out one at a time and talk about things. Sometimes it's a more general discussion in PLC time. The important thing is to debrief so you can acknowledge all of what is going well and work on what needs attention. Which leads to the next component, feedback and support. Every time we came in looking at instruction, we would leave feedback for the teacher. Always something positive, and if there was an issue, we would give precise examples of what we were questioning. Then we met with teachers later in the day to ask more questions, clarify, assess needs, etc. This was so helpful because while it wasn't immediate, it was the same day and we had a shared context to discuss. It allowed us to hear the whole story and offer guidance if it was needed. The last thing here is peer-to-peer observations. Once a week, we have a roving sub who releases a teacher to do walkthroughs with the admin team. This is invaluable. Teachers amp up their game when another teacher comes in. Teachers also love to see what others are doing. This one single practice has completely legitimized the walkthrough process and the follow-up afterwards. Teachers could actually see why we were focusing on specific areas of instruction when they looked at each other's classrooms. It was so valuable. Which leads to this point. Having teachers engage in the monitoring means that there are no secret agendas. It builds the culture that we all matter, we are all part of it, and every person can know better, do better, be better. It showed them that everyone had different strengths to offer up and everyone struggles with some things. This was really important. No one felt picked on then. So, where to begin then? Let's start with lesson plans and student work. I'm not going to lie, I'm a huge proponent of teachers turning in lesson plans. Not all of their plans, but at least something each week. Teachers hate this, I know. As a teacher, I was an overplanner. I wrote extensive plans and never wanted to be left stranded with nothing for kids to do. But some teachers never write more than a 3-line agenda for each day in their date book or calendar. Here's my issue with this. By not doing lesson plans, students miss out on intentional teaching. They often get fly-by-the-seat-of-my-pants teaching, the I've taught this book 100 times and don't need lesson plans method. Well, Common Core asks a lot of teachers and students, and I don't know how anyone could possibly even consider not planning detailed lessons. So my advice is, have teachers plan and submit at least one detailed lesson a week. This way, you can look to see that the expectations you have set as a group are being addressed, at least in the lesson plan. Then, using a protocol, and there are many floating around in the world, and we'll try one in a minute. Have teachers go through the plans and see if they address the key features of Common Core instruction. Next, I recommend using a structured protocol so that it is objective and not personal. The process then guides the discussion, and the focus can be on the outcomes of the lesson. Also, it's useful to let teachers decide which lessons they would like to study and do a self-check on. Let's look at one now. So here's a fairly simple protocol that can be adapted to focus on different elements. It's best done in pairs so teachers can talk through it with someone as they go through the lesson. All you need are different colored highlighters, a pen, and the lesson plan. Feel free to get some highlighters to do these steps with me if you like. Let's try it. Take a look at the attached lesson plan. It's a 9th grade lesson on the poem Oranges by Gary Soto. The first step is to read through the lesson all the way through to get the gist of it. You may want to stop here and do this if you're watching this on the archive. Next, you would just discuss general impressions of the lesson in pairs. Next, read through it again and this time highlight the objective in yellow. Then look through and highlight all the components in the lesson that would lead to mastery of the objective in yellow as well. You may have something similar to this. Note the lesson objective is that students will analyze the development of the theme and demonstrate understanding of figurative language. So a few of the items that lead to the objective start in the anticipatory set with generating words and phrases related to first dates and then the writing of sentences that describe winter. These are clearly set up for learning about figurative language. Then there's work talking to the text as they read and citing specific lines that lead to the theme. The next group activity is also clear practice in identifying figurative language and how it impacts the mood and tone. And finally, students demonstrate understanding by writing a short constructed response on the theme. So next then, we turn to the language objective and targeted language function and highlight those in pink along with the pieces that lead to those objectives. So here you'll notice I've highlighted the language objective. Students will work in pairs to share ideas and write original poems using the free verse method, as well as the language function, learning about free verse and how punctuation helps guide meaning, as well as the use of modifiers in the poem. On page 2, I've highlighted moments where students work in pairs and debrief, as well as the explicit instruction on free verse in the middle of the page. I also included the group work assignment with presentations and so on. The next piece is to go back and mark the DOK level of each activity. Why do this? Well, we want to ensure that students are engaged in a range of levels of thinking and processing of content. Will we see all 4 levels in every lesson teachers write? No, level 4 is hard to hit daily as it requires work over time and multiple modes and medium, so it is likely that level 4 work is done every few weeks or so. As you can see from my markings on the left, the activities began at a level 1, as many lessons do and probably should. And as students progress through the layers of meaning in the reading, the level goes up to a 3 with application of concepts in the short constructed response and creation of a new free verse poem using modifiers. You will see level 2/3 markings because sometimes it really depends on the actual teaching part of the lesson and how students respond as to the level of DOK. The item may have the potential to be a level 3, but students don't quite make the connection yet, so it ends up being a 2. Finally, the last thing to do is to go back and look for elements of integrated ELD. Common Core asks that we address the needs of English learners in our content classes, and so it's important to keep that front and center as well. Take the blue highlighter and see if there are any elements embedded in this lesson. Here are a few things I noted. It was meaningful and relevant, talking about first dates. The text was authentic and not necessarily challenging in content, but more so in structure and stylistic elements. There was lots of background building. Students had many opportunities to debrief in pairs and whole group. The original poem students were to write at the end would also be a good reflection of whether they had understood both the free verse structure and use of modifiers. So lastly here, You would end with a final debrief in which teachers would compare the markings they had made and decide if they believed that the objectives would be met through the instruction offered in the lesson. They would look at the DOK levels and opportunities for collaboration, as well as determine if the supports for English learners would lead to the desired outcomes. This debrief is really to summarize and see if there are areas that could be enhanced. If student work is available to look at related to this lesson, the next step would be to go through the samples and see how they reflected the mastery of the lesson objectives and outcomes. What I have found is that the process of going through this protocol, even just a few times with teachers, is invaluable. They inevitably see the holes in their own planning and can quickly figure out how to fill them. All right, moving on. Let's look at classroom walkthroughs now. It's one thing to plan an amazing lesson on paper, and it's another to actually execute it. Walkthroughs are an excellent way to get an accurate picture of classroom instruction. They can be short as well, 5 minutes or so, conducted at varying times of the day, and can give a host of information about how students are doing. It also gives ways to highlight great practices and showcase the good work taking place. It can likewise bring to light areas that teachers seem to have issues and need support as well. Here's an example of a tool that I have used. We created it with teachers and recently added the piece on integrated ELD. The first box on the left looks at things the teacher might be doing in an ELA Common Core classroom. It has items such as explaining a standard, modeling their thinking, facilitating discussion, or providing opportunities for students to do a variety of close reading tasks. The box on the top right then features things students might be engaged in, like working collaboratively, working through text, or writing responses to text. The middle left box looks at room environment and evidence that Common Core instruction is going on with things like posted objectives and standards, desk setup for collaboration, and student work posted that reflects standards practice. The middle right box deals with student work products that reflect mastery of standards, and the very last box has features of integrated ELD instruction from the framework. This tool could easily be tweaked and adapted to suit your needs, so feel free to take it and do with what you wish. No need to reinvent the wheel here. So let's try it. Watch this video of an 8th grade English lesson on finding evidence for arguments. Look around his room as you watch and try to take in the whole picture. Mark as many items on your template as you can see. Here we go.
As far as this lesson goes and Common Core standards, I think one of the strongest aspects of this particular lesson addresses citing textual evidence. Today's topic is teen driving. It is a part of a larger picture, but they'll have to decide on their own whether or not we should increase the legal age for teen driving. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with a little bit of discussion about kind of what you think is age appropriate when you become responsible as a student.
Well, I think you can become responsible at any age because, for example, if you have your mind set on being responsible, you will be responsible.
So you're saying you think it's less of an age and it's more of a mindset?
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up because you will be reading something about that in your text in a little bit. So these are all things I want you to think about. The next step, I present them with the text. They are required to go through the text and do what we call text marking. And I want you to mark what is a fact and what is an opinion. Facts are something that you, as a researcher, or a scientist, a student, a human being, something that you can prove. I want them to understand when they're reading through informational text that oftentimes authors will present something that as a fact when it's not being backed up, and so I just want them to be able to differentiate. But really the goal behind any text marking is to focus them on the text. What I'm trying to get you to do is start to think about how you feel about this topic, and eventually you're going to back up your opinions with the things that you've read from these articles. All right, in these small groups on the note page provided, I want you to work together. What you're going to do is you're going to find and label the notes. And on the right-hand side, you have 4 different columns. It says money, maturity, behavior, education, or experience. you have to categorize those notes.
16-year-old drivers are involved in fatal crashes at a rate nearly 5 times the rate of drivers 20 or older. So probably maturity too, because we're talking about the age.
I really don't know. It's probably most likely between maturity and education and behavior.
Maturity.
After they finish the directed note-taking, I had them get into larger groups, and this is where we start to move into the philosophical chairs aspect, which can also be done as a Socratic seminar or any other kind of discussion technique. Philosophical chairs always has some sort of side issue, all right? Remember, it is not a debate because we don't win. It is a discussion because we share our opinions. That's the difference between debate and discussion. It's called a jury-style philosophical chair. They were moved into groups of about 5. They elect a jury foreperson, and they're going to decide as a jury, after reading the text again and discussing it amongst the peers, where they fall on a basic question.
16-year-old drivers are involved in fatal crashes at a rate nearly 5 times the rate of adults, people 20 years or older. So for 16, still leaves 4 years of immaturity and reckless driving.
I still disagree because do you guys want to drive at 18 instead of 16?
Yes.
You'd rather wait 2 more years than you need to. And what if you have a job?
It's like saying in paragraph 10 that they want to be like, oh, it's all teenagers, but it's actually, there's more people 20 to 49 years old who are killed because of alcohol poisoning than the teens are. So it's like, you can't exactly blame the entire teen population for that.
This is one of my favorite things about this lesson is how strong it is in this collaborative discussion. Even though I have them start out individually, the real meat of this lesson lies in the Common Core standard of collaborative discussion. Now is the time to use your challenge card. What I want you to do is, as a group, come up with one question for another jury that either clarifies or asks them to challenge their opinion.
When you were reading from paragraph 10, you only said half of what they had said, and it has read only about 10% of the 16-year-old drivers killed in 2003 had blood alcohol concentrations of 0.10 or higher. But you didn't finish the sentence that says compared with 43% of 20 to 49-year-old drivers killed, according to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
Dang! How do you respond? Your whole group can take part in that.
Okay, well, can you find a positive quote in this article that has to do with keeping the age 16?
One of the goals of Common Core is, once they get out of high school, will they be able to survive in college and in a career? Will they be able to discuss their ideas with their peers?
When you're starting at 16, since you don't have that much experience, you are risking more lives.
No, the article says that if you're going to start at 18, it's the same thing as starting at 16, because you're not going to be driving from that.
You gotta hang on for 1 second. Now, guys, the important part about this is not to win an argument. The important part is that you've gone to the text for facts, you've gone to the text to create your argument, and that's how you form an argumentative essay, which is what our goal is today anyway. I think Common Core is still a mystery to a lot of teachers, but in reality, it simplifies life. Every grade level is headed towards the same goal, and so while we do it differently in grade levels, or it's on a different plane, the direction that we're all headed in is the same. And so now that I have my head wrapped around Common Core, I actually enjoy it a lot more. I feel like it gives me more freedom with my curriculum.
Feel free to take a minute to stop here and discuss if you're listening on the archive. In the meantime, I'll share my notes. I saw many elements of Common Core instruction. The teacher did a lot of facilitating of groups and class discussion. He provided opportunities for students to make claims and cite evidence from the text. Students were working collaboratively, engaged in close reading, and using a graphic organizer to record facts and opinions and other notes. They cited evidence and presented arguments, as well as evaluated peer claims. The room was set up for collaboration, and it appeared they were used to it. So you get the drift here, and overall I think it was clear he had a good grasp of Common Core instruction. There were many positives. The feedback I would give would relate to 2 areas: room environment and language functions. His room was a bit of a mess, and it was hard to see if there was student work because of the piles of junk everywhere. And as far as language function, I think he could have done a bit more on calling out the language function of fact and opinion for his English learners. We may have just not seen all of it in the editing of the clip, but it's an area that could have been a bit more explicit. At any rate, it's important to remember that the tool is not meant to be completely filled out every time. No one can attend to every single item all of the time. And depending on the time spent in class and the point in the lesson that the walkthrough occurs, a lot or a little may be evident. So really what it's good for is a general impression of how Common Core is playing out in the classroom over time. If the same issues arise time after time, then it becomes something to address in coaching or PLC time. So that is a quick look at a few resources for monitoring Common Core instruction in the ELA classroom. I hope you found this useful. If you have questions or comments, feel free to email me. Many thanks to the teaching channel for granting permission to use their video in this module. And thank you as well for attending. Happy monitoring!